Hi there. I'm studying Marcion at the moment. Marcion set up an alternative Christianity between 150 and it went on to about 400 CE. So um, quite a big alternative Christian movement with its emphasis on two gods, God of the Old Testament and the true God, which is the God of the New Testament. Um, and the New Testament has to be edited in a certain way so that all references to the Old Testament God are removed or reinterpreted and in a way through the editing. And a lot of had a lot of supporters. I think quite influential and rich supporters as well. The same as the Orthodox Christian supporters, had people in the higher echelons of society giving money and support to the Orthodox Church. So Marcion is quite significant, really. Um, the point has to be made, though, that as academics agree that Marcion hasn't got much to do with Gnosticism per se, although there are similarities with certain aspects of Gnosticism, such as the two gods and that Christ only having an appearance on earth rather than being the Logos in flesh, and the dualism between spirit and matter. But Gnosticism is is a bit more complex, if in a way, than Marcionite Christianity. But one of the things Marcion, it's fascinating, really, because one of the things that Marcion, he divided deity into two categories, or yes, two gods, really. And the Judaic God is a legalistic God, a just God. And we'll come on to what just might mean in a minute. Whereas the true God, the unknown God, the God of Jesus Christ, is the God of love, unconditional love. And there's a great deal that might be said about the origins of Marcion's thought and his rejection of the legalism and emphasis on justice of the Judaic God. I mean, just think about this for a minute. In Judaism, you've got literally hundreds of religious rules and regulations, all of which you have to follow to the absolute letter. And if you don't follow these rules to the absolute letter, if you break any one of these rules, you're either out, you're either not part of the Judaic religion, or you have to be severely punished, or even put to death if you break some of the religious rules, and this is the Judaic life. Well, at least it was, in the classical pre-medieval era, the early years of Christianity. And before that, so this is the rule of the temple, the Sadducees, and the interpreters of religious law, and you had to apply religious law to your everyday life vigorously, and in great detail and with great attention to detail, and this was the covenant between the Jewish people and the Jewish God, and a covenant is literally that. If you want to be if you want Yahweh to be your God, you have to follow every single one of these religious laws. Otherwise, you're not part of Yahweh's gang. And you may say that, as Marcion said, that this is incredibly arbitrary and is conditional love. But when you think about it, really, every relationship that you have with anybody is based on a tacit or written set of agreements about norms, values, and behaviours. Behaviours that are acceptable, behaviours that are unacceptable. And this is really part of the basis of your relationship with anybody. And if they misbehave, and if they go against this tacit set of behaviors, then they're no longer considered to be in relationship with you, or their relationship is suspended in some way, and they have to make recompense to you for having broken the bases of the relationship that are either tacit or actually there as a set of vows that you make before witnesses, which is what the marriage vows are like in Christianity, for example. And and if you break the rules, it's a basis for ending the relationship, and then you have to divide the assets of the two parties involved in the relationship equally between them, and you get divorce settlements and such like. So it's a big deal. You can't just put up with anybody's behaviour, with any behaviour from your partner. You just because you're in love with them or just because they are your partner, that's not sufficient. So it's not unconditional love. It's love that's given and received on condition that your partner behaves in a certain way and behaves respectfully towards you in all senses and at all levels. So if you want to go into a relationship with the tribal god of the Jews had to agree to abide by a large set of rules, some of which, of course, appeared to be most arbitrary and petty and nitpicking. And it was this kind of arbitrary set of rules that defined the relationship between God and the Jews, between God and mankind, that Marcion took great exception to. And of course, to an extent, St. Paul himself took a great exception to as well, and said that these rules were not needed, including, very importantly, circumcision. And circumcision, of course, is the one great symbol of the covenant between the Jewish God and the Jewish people. And it is circumcision that basically defines who you are in religious terms, in tribal terms as well. And that, of course, was rejected by Orthodox Christianity. But Marcion went further, and he said that no God of Jesus Christ, the God of Jesus Christ couldn't be the same God as the God of Abraham and Isaac. It just didn't seem to gel. It didn't logically follow, because it seemed to Marcion that if you looked at most of the contents of the New Testament, the contents of the New Testament define a totally different God, a God who is based on unconditional love and forgiveness, rather than exclusion and punishment and even the death penalty for breaking any of the rules, and rules that seem to be very arbitrary, and almost to the extent that, as sort of to think about Euthyphro and his relationship with Socrates. Socrates said, is morality what a god approves of? Or does a god, or should a god approve of some overarching morality, which is common to all sentient beings and all supernatural beings all over the universe? Which is and it seemed to Marcion that the Jewish God set up these rules basically because he could, and there was and just simply because you had to be obedient to him and follow all these rules, and as if all these rules were sort of tests of your faith, tests of your agreement. So it's like you have an agreement with a God, and then the God tests your commitment to that agreement in hundreds of different ways, in hundreds of different arbitrary, petty, and really, really quite cruel ways as well. And this to Marcion didn't seem like the same God as the God of Jesus Christ. And the Father of Jesus was a completely different God, therefore, from the God of the Jews. And therefore, no reference in the New Testament should be made to the Old Testament, and no reference should be made to Jesus saying that he was the son of the Jewish God, but rather of a completely new, unknown God, a God that's occult, that is hidden from view, etc., etc. So, very, very interesting that, and you can almost think that Marcion, but there's another aspect to this as well, because you could say that some of the rules of Judaism are there for people's safety and people's personal hygiene, and for stopping the spread of diseases, for example, and for promoting the good life generally, and that they're not just a set of arbitrary rules cruelly set out by this terrible agreement between man and God, which is in the Old Testament, this terrible binding contract with all these clauses which are very easily broken because we live in the real world and not in the absolute utopic world that is defined by Judaic law. We live in a world where it's very difficult to keep Judaic law, you see, in its absolute sense and in all its aspects. But I mean, anyway, but some of the laws probably do have a basis in goodness, in the sense that that they're there for the protection of the community and for the individual and for the promotion of the good life, and of the prevention of wickedness, and destitution and desolation and death, and destruction to the community. Never mind the destruction of the covenant or the agreement between God and his people. They are there to keep society in order, rather than spreading chaos and anarchy amongst the communities that worship this God. So in that case, it's kind of difficult to totally reject Judaic law absolutely and outright, and to condemn the God that set up Judaic law, because it could be that this God has a certain amount of wisdom, albeit rather taken to extremes. But at any rate, this extreme God, if you like, this extremely fussy God that wants to protect man from himself in great detail and with great force. This fussy, petty sort of God, again, has nothing to do with Jesus Christ and his sort of message of forgiveness and goodness, but goodness in a very broad sense of the word. So not, if for example you need to save an animal on the Sabbath, you would do that because compassion towards animals counts for more than just obeying the injunction not to do any work or do anything at all on the Sabbath, you see. And attending to your absolute biological needs, you can be forgiven for that, even if the biological impulses offend some aspect of Judaic law. There should be forgiveness there, written into the heart of any agreement or covenant between deity and devotee. So that's very interesting as well. That I almost think that when you think about norms, values, and beliefs in society, a lot of them are to do with preventing biological and social disaster. But perhaps Marcion saw, like a lot of people have seen over the centuries, the classic thing of the father and the daughter. The daughter gets herself pregnant, right? Well, do you forgive the daughter, or do you throw her out of the house? And it's a moral dilemma in a way for the father, because one's impulse is to forgive the daughter and to hold her in your arms and say everything's going to be all right, and forgive her, and think to yourself, well, kids make mistakes, and they fall in love, and one thing leads to another, and then they have a quick tumble, and then they get pregnant. Because you can get pregnant from one sexual sexual penetration. So this is what kids do. I can't be helped, and I'll forgive her. I won't throw her out of the house or anything. But on the other hand, if you're going to do that, people in your area, in your community, are going to say your daughter's a whore, and that you should throw her out of your house, and maybe they won't do business with you anymore, and maybe they will censor you, or maybe they won't let you into the temple, or maybe they'll spit at you on the street, or maybe they'll spit at your wife on the street, or whatever, because your daughter is a prostitute, according to social mores. And you might not care. You might say, I don't care. I'm going to defend my daughter. But your daughter has, from one point of view, brought dishonor to the entire family. So what do you do, actually? And when you think about, the whole thing about arranged marriages, and marriages between families, I mean, the whole point about arranged marriages is there's practical reasons why arranged marriages, can have some economic, social benefits and even emotional benefits to the parties involved. And it's not all about, marrying for love, because, love is dependent on a lot of things, economics and, for example, if you know that the family of the boy involved has insanity in the family, well, you don't really want that insanity to coming into your family, which is why you said to the girl, you can't have sex or marry that particular boy's family. You can't have children by that particular individual because their family is very suspect, and there's insanity there, or epilepsy, or some kind of strange diseases that we don't know what they are. So we're trying to protect our family and the community from perhaps producing children who need special needs, who have special needs, because we can't provide those needs because we live in tents in the desert, and we have to be very careful who we do marry boys and girls off to, but of course the girl doesn't take any notice of that, and well, just has a fling, I suppose, and a lot of people, of course, just succumb to their impulses and have sex once, and of course then they get pregnant, and the whole thing goes belly up. So and it might be very difficult for you, even if you want to forgive her, even forgive the boy, of course, for having sex with the girl, the other family. Although unfortunately, it's always normally the girl that's blamed for the sexual activity, and for getting pregnant. But of course, it could be that you can't help getting pregnant because you don't have any means of contraception. And people, the means of contraception are available freely all over the West, and people still get pregnant with unwanted pregnancies still happen regularly, obviously, because then there's abortion. And of course, you say to her, you can't have an abortion, and there might be no way of having a safe abortion for the girl that we envisage in our tents in the desert. So you're going to have the baby. But the question is, can you have the baby in my tent under my roof or not? And can I actually have your baby or illegitimate baby as one of our family? And can that illegitimate baby have the same status in the family? Or will it have the status of a slave or a chattel or a servant in our family? Which, of course, is going to be upsetting. So there's all sorts of complex issues which arise. And naturally enough, these are going to be stressful times, and the father's going to be pretty angry and stressed about the whole thing. And you may say, oh, well, this is just, to hell with society, this is just social mores, and why can't she get pregnant? She wants to, and all this. But I've already explained, there could be practical, economic, social, biological reasons why you can't just get pregnant with anybody you want to. And anyway, who is going to look after the baby, and the boy is just going to run away or not take responsibility for what they've done, etc., etc. And their family closes ranks and says, "Oh, it's nothing to do with us, nothing to do with our son." It's your daughter's fault. She got pregnant, so you're landed with this problem where we're not going to help out at all. So all this kind of thing can happen and has happened over the centuries, over thousands of years, I guess. Even happens today in modern society. All this kind of stuff happens, admittedly sometimes in a diluted form, although that depends on the social class involved. Working class people, I think, could have a rougher time of all this, of unwanted pregnancies, rather than middle class. So, but again, according to Marcion, what's this got to do with unconditional love? It should be that one loves and forgives the daughter unconditionally for her, for her 20 minutes of stupidity and 20 minutes of thoughtless sexual activity. Because of her inexperience and because of her youth and immaturity, and perhaps she lacks self-esteem, and I don't know. There's loads of things that can happen, and she believes lies that are told to her by the boy. That he's going to look after and marry her, and of course, he has no intention of doing anything like that at all. So big problem. But I can see that the Gnostic response to all this is to say, well, the God, the architect God, has set up all the problems that are associated with fornication, such as the spread of sexually transmitted diseases. The architect God has set up the idea of the economic scarcity and scarcity of resources, and the problems of dividing resources equally and surviving on limitation. So limitation, biological threat, and scarcity of resources. These three factors combine to create a situation which societies and communities have to respond to by setting up a set of laws that govern relationships between husband and wife, between father and daughter, and son and mother, and siblings, and inheritance, and all that. It's because of these biological problems, scarcity, biological threat, and and the other one, which I've forgotten. Because of these factors, society has to respond in certain ways. And society is about really relationships between people, and these relationships have to be governed by a set of rules which everybody has to agree on. And if you break those rules, then you must expect censure, or even exclusion from the community, or some kind of punishment. To go back to your father with a pregnant daughter, it may be that he's condemning his entire family for being outcast because of the activities of the daughter, or of the son, who's got the woman, the girl pregnant. You see, so it's like the whole thing has been kind of set up. The whole of existence is set up with a whole set of problems, which mean that we can't practice unconditional love. It means that, we can't be sort of fluffy hippie types and just go around loving everybody and everything's beautiful and wonderful, because the world isn't beautiful and wonderful. So our responses to an imperfect world maybe a set of imperfect laws, norms, values, and beliefs, and a belief in an imperfect God that demands a covenant with Him that is based on a set of rules and laws which may appear to be arbitrary, even if they are based on reducing biological threat, for example. Or coping with with resource scarcity, for another example. So, I don't know if Marcion is. You see, you have to see. It's like Marcion appears to be kind of oversensitive and wrong. 'Cause why shouldn't a deity demand a set of rules that define relationship between him and his devotees? I mean, for example, I've taught yoga, and yoga is basically authoritarian. It's based on obedience to the guru, and the guru is adhering to tradition, and the tradition has been said to have been founded by Lord Shiva himself. You see, so although yoga people don't usually have you whipped or killed or excluded, or they might have you excluded if you're not going to do the yoga by the proper rules, which are there for your safety and for the proper distribution of prana and circulation of prana in the body. If you're not going to abide by the rules because it's going to do what you want, well, the door's over there. You see, you're not part of this yoga ashram if you're not going to abide by the rules. Sorry, so we're going to be nice about it, but still, authoritarian at basis. And I mean, communities are based on authority ultimately. There's got to be some authority, either a constitutional authority or authority of law, and then there's got to be people that enforce these laws and enforce the constitution. So you can't really get away with it. But it seems to Marcion and people that follow Marcion that all this has been set up by a cruel and by a God that delights in scarcity and delights in seeing our reactions and responses to scarcity and to biological threat. And it's all been kind of set up so that we human beings write the script according to parameters which the demiurge has already set up, so that you can't escape those parameters, so you can only react in certain ways. Even if you want to practice unconditional love, you can't, because we live in a practical world, and we've got to respond practically. And necessity seems the only morality sometimes. Whatever is necessary to survive. Well, that determines your moral response. That determines what you're going to do about something in reaction to a set of circumstances. You see, and I suppose so. That's what Marcion and some of the Gnostics are objecting to, and they say this whole thing, this whole world, this whole matrix, if you like, we could do without it. If we lived in a world where there was no scarcity, if we lived in a world where it didn't matter if you got pregnant or not, well, you wouldn't get pregnant because there wouldn't be any biological pregnancies. The whole thing, the world would be so different that our responses would be more in keeping with unconditional love instead of conditional love, and that would be the kind of world that we would be able to follow Jesus in, sort of thing. Because it's very hard to follow Jesus in the world we actually live in. Although you could argue, well, that's the test, isn't it, to follow Jesus, even though we live in a world where following Jesus is extremely hard because of all the problems that are faced by humans on the biological level. So but I can understand, and I hope you understand, why Gnostics sort of take a great big broad view of all this and say, do you know what? The whole world is wrong. It was wrong from the get-go. It was wrong from the first step, and because it is wrong, it cannot be corrected. It's like in a spiral, like in a dance. It's like in a circle dance. If somebody puts the wrong foot forward, they completely destroy the whole dance, you see, and it's very difficult to correct the mistake that one person has made. And it's like as if this world is flawed, and so it's very difficult to be spiritual in a flawed world. How can it be done? And what we need to do is concentrate on another world, the next world, where it is natural and easy to be unconditional in our love, because we live in a sphere of unconditional love. We live in a sphere where it's possible to be unconditionally loving, because there are no stresses, there are no obstacles to that unconditional love. But then other people may say, well, that's the whole point, isn't it? If you have obstacles to your unconditional love, and for example, with a father and a daughter, you forgive your daughter for becoming pregnant, even though there's going to be trouble for your entire family, for years to come, and you're prepared to go against your entire community and basically, you know, uh, basically bear the criticism of your neighbours. If you're prepared to do that, then perhaps unconditional love is very strong because it exists in this world and doesn't wait until there's some utopian world where unconditional love is possible. But anyway, so but the Gnostics will say, well, there's no argument about this, really. You know very well that this world is against us. This world is set up to trip us over. We have utopian ideals. We want to love unconditionally, but you know as well as I do that in the end, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen unless you go and live in the forest, something like a sannyasin, and have nothing to do with society, whatever. But then things turn up in the forests as well, which also test your ability to love unconditionally. There are plenty of stories about that in India, for example. So, the Gnostic kind of worldview remains as it is, and if you disagree with it, well, you're just sort of disagreeing with it from the point of view of this world. But if you lived in another world, maybe you could do nothing else but agree with it, because the world we'll be living in will be completely suited to the sort of to the kind of feeling that one has from the life of Christ, for example, and his sort of overriding kind of sense of morality based on broad issues rather than petty laws. But of course, you can also say to me, "Well, Jesus said you commit adultery in your heart." That's pretty severe, and he was pretty unforgiving of some things which people did in his father's temple, for example. Take a whip to the people in the temple that were doing the changing money and things like that. What has all this to do with my father's temple? Out you all go. So he could be only cursed the fig tree. So he could be quite angry and quite stern himself as a rabbi. Is this kind of like a hippie liberal Jesus that people want to believe in today? I don't know. I mean, in many ways, Jesus appears to be quite a orthodox, severe rabbi, every bit as severe a rabbi as the Sadducees and Pharisees, really. I leave it up to you to contemplate this, and you may come to a different conclusion from the Gnostic one if you so wish, and it's difficult for Gnostics to argue with you on this plane in the lower worlds, as it were. They're not going to argue with you in the lower worlds. They're probably going to agree with you, but they're going to say, well, there is another world where my arguments are going to shine through and your arguments are not going to apply.